Today, my topic is growing evergreens in containers. This has become a very popular question we get, especially this time of year during the holiday season. There's not a ton of plants, flowering plants that do well through the wintertime here. So we can combat that issue with using evergreens. Really, the only flowering plant that comes to mind that's going to stay up through the wintertime is your pansies. And you should have already had those planted. We're actually currently out of pansies now. But another thing to do is when you get your mindset on getting a container, getting an evergreen plant in the container along with flowering pansies creates a nice little scene. So there's a number of things we need to kind of talk about to figure out what's best for you in your home. The first thing I wanted to get into, though, is that everything that we receive is grown in a pot. So I understand that the people that are growing these plants in pots, this is their full-time job and their careers, and so they spend a lot of time with the plants and growing them, and they know how to grow them, and they do it every single day. So we, as homeowners, typically are not as good at looking at our plants every day and being out there with them, especially through the winter. We get busy. We got kids. We got jobs. We got vacations. So our potted plants can get a little neglected sometimes. And there's some plants that can take that a little bit better than others. We'll get into that a little bit later on some specific plants that I brought in today. But I just want you to know that if when you come out here or whatever and talk to us about which plants are good for pots or whatever, really across the board anything can be grown in pots. It really just is it's based on you and how much attention and time you can give to them on how they're going to look through the whole winter. And another thing I think we ought to talk about first off is that if we want this container to be a, if you will, forever container with the same plant in the same pot for a very long time, even through the winter months and into spring and summer of next year, if you want to try to grow plants, for a long period of time, versus a plant that we're just going to put in pots for the winter time and then exchange it out in the spring whenever all of our beautiful flowers come in, and switch them out later. So I'll teach you a little trick of what you can do with that a little later in the broadcast, on how we can switch those out without too much work, or you can keep a plant in a pot for a long time. So let's just talk about kind of the first steps we need to figure out before you choose your plant. So the first thing is going to be, in my mind, is going to be your sun exposure. So this is kind of crucial when it comes to evergreens for the most part. Now, there are evergreens that can live in the shade pretty well. A lot of times what I see is potted plants that are up next to your front door as you enter. This kind of dictates how much light you're going to get there. Now, the sun is lower in the sky over the wintertime, so a lot of times sun will peek through up underneath your porch. Now, if you have a big, a really wide front porch and you know that in the back next to your door, you're not getting a ton of sunlight back in there, we need to know that whenever you come out here and tell us what kind of sun exposure you have. So, a couple days before you decide to come out here and shop, just kind of look at what you've got while you're at home and see actually how much light is getting in onto your porch, or if you have your pots, brought out closer to, say, your steps walking up, or even just out further, in the open, that's getting a full sun environment. That's very helpful for us to know. There's a number of plants you can use for a full sun scenario. There's not as many options whenever we're talking about a shade environment. So general rule of thumb is that the more needle-like the plant, like this here on my right, this is a dwarf Alberta spruce. This is probably number one potted plant for the wintertime. It resembles a Christmas tree. It is very dense. It holds lights very well, holds ornaments very well. It's a very slow-growing plant. But you can see it's needle-like. It's not like a broad leaf at all. So general rule of thumb, the needle-like plants are going to need more sunlight in general than some other plants that we're going to talk about later. So that's just a general rule of thumb, but it is the first step we need to know to help you best is what kind of sun exposure you have. So try to, get a good grip on that. Okay. Second thing we need to figure out, and the second question that I typically always ask a customer is, what kind of shape are you looking for within this plant? and this kind of depends on your pot shape, if you ask me, if you already have your pots or if you're going to choose them when you're out here as well. But what kind of shape are you looking for? Are you looking for a tight, uniform, kind of upright shape like this? Are you looking for more of a round, formal, like this boxwood here that's a really nice boxwood, but it's very, very round? Are you looking for a very loose habit like this one that I brought in here that's more kind of flowy, textural, if you will? Then we've got a little wide grower over here, which is a type of cephalotaxis, which is a plum yew that's kind of got this sprawly effect that kind of comes outside of the pot a little bit, if you will. Or you could go really formal with this topiary design. Bring it up a little. This that has been worked on. You can see the spiral look of this boxwood, which is very formal. And you'll have to keep that trim to keep that shape, but that's another popular option for people to use as well. So, like I said, determining the shape of the plant is going to help us out as well. And you don't have to know that. I mean, that's just a question that I ask, and a lot of people, they get taken aback from that question. They're like, well, I never really thought of that. I just wanted to plant for a pot. So I'm going to ask you that if you come to me, and we're going to figure that out hopefully first to get us in the right direction anyway, because there's so many plants we can choose from. Hey, Tyler.
Hey, I'd also like to add, I forgot to mention at the beginning that feel free to ask any questions at any time during this webinar. You can type it in the chat, so if you have specific things and you're on a time crunch, we can get them answered as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I kind of like that format. Just throw them questions out at me whenever you got them, if you have them. So
yes, and then also this webinar will be available later on our archive on our website. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tyler. Okay, so yes, determining the shape. That's going to get us in the right direction, get you in and out of here a little bit quicker than trying to look through every single plant that we've got that's evergreen that can live in a pot. The next thing we ought to go to is the orientation of the pot. How are you going to see it? So is it going to be on your front porch right next to your door where you only see it from the front? Or is it going to be stepped out a little bit further to where whenever you walk out onto your front porch or walk out into your patio area or whatever it is, are you going to see this pot from all angles? Are you going to see from the whole way around it? That's going to determine kind of how we're going to orient the plant. And I say this mainly speaking in the terms of like a mixed container. If you're not going to do a mixed container, then it's not all that crucial on really how you set it up. But say you are going to do some flower power out in the front of one of these evergreen plants, and you do have your pot sitting next to your door up against a wall, you're obviously going to put your evergreen towards the back of the container and leave yourself room in the front for some color and even maybe some spillers, say like some ivy, evergreen ivy, or some evergreen vinca, things like that you can use to get you through the winter time. If it is a scenario to where you see it from all angles, then we are going to plant your evergreen plant dead center of that container, and then we're going to get that color working around it and the spillers going in all directions. So, like I said, that's more for mixed containers, but it is a step that I like to know before we go further with you too, and how we're going to orient that pot. So let's go, since we're talking about pots, let's go ahead and talk about the size of the pots. Like I said earlier, you might already have your pots. You might have already, like, say for me, I've had two big, nice, large ceramic pots that I decided to spend some money on and just have them at my house. I've had them for a number of years now, so I keep the same pots. And a lot of you are like that as well. You've already got your pots before you ever even come out here. If you could take a little picture of that pot, or at least give me some rough dimensions on how big it is, to figure out how big of a plant we can put in your pot. Now, generally speaking, if you don't have your pot, and you're going to choose one out here, then we need to know the pot size. Now, do know that every plant in a small container, can go into a very large pot if that's what you have. What you have to worry about a little bit in that scenario, the biggest problem is going to be the overwatering of plants. So this happens across the board. Almost everybody that's grown plants in containers has, at one point in their life, figured out they're watering it too much. And you see bad-looking plants up top whenever it's too wet down below. When you have a very large container like that, and you've got a small-ish container that's not going to fill it at all, then there's the roots are kind of still up here, and there's not a ton that are just like growing down and finding that, and getting into the soil down below it over the winter time. There's just not a lot of growth happening. What you can do is keep the soil too wet, and then you get issues. So we generally tell people just go a little bit bigger than what this container is. This is a little 2-gallon pot right here, and like I said, you can put it in a large container. You just kind of have to watch out with the watering, but generally speaking, only go up like a size or two bigger than what this is. So you don't want to see like a big old plant in a small little pot that looks funny, but you don't want to see typically a small little guy like this in an extremely large container either. That looks kind of off. So just know that you can go in any size pot you want, but keep an eye on that water. And we're going to talk about watering later. That's a whole thing.
There we go. And in tandem with watering, we have a question here on Facebook. Should shrubs in pots be fertilized, and when?
Yes. So I was going to get to that in a little bit, but we can go ahead and get there. Really what I recommend when it comes to containers, and the easiest way to do it, and what all nurserymen typically across the country do as well, is right whenever you plant your evergreen in your pot, you're going to get a product that's just a shake and feed on top. You've probably heard of Osmocote. All of these nursery containers, if you look down in them, and you've probably seen this before, little green or yellow beads on the top of the soil. That's literally just a time release fertilizer that is just a general application. It's the easiest way to do it. You just shake it on top. It'll tell you how much to use. Make sure you read your product label on the back. Shake it on top, work it in a little bit to the top couple inches of the soil, and your fertilizer is already in the pot, and it's ready to go. So like I said, nurserymen across the board are using this because it's the easiest way to do it, and it slowly feeds as time goes on. Now, if you're going to do it this time of year, go ahead and put that fertilizer down on top of the soil. You can already have it in there, and whenever the spring comes around and we start getting warmer weather, and it starts to kind of acclimate that fertilizer, and then whenever you water, the water is going to slowly leach those little granules away, and it's going to get fertilizer down into the root zone in the spring whenever plants are actively growing. So that's what I recommend to do because it's the easiest way to do it, and we sell those products here. There's a couple of them, a couple different ones, but I certainly recommend that. Now, the thing is you need to know is that plants in nature and in the ground, they get fertilizer naturally from the earth. Whenever you put a plant in a pot, you're not getting anything from the earth. It's all coming from that soil blend and fertilizer. So plants in the spring, they really like to be that's when they're actively growing and using fertilizer. So certainly I recommend having something down in there and redoing. If this is a long-term application for an evergreen in a pot for a long time, we need to probably redo that every year, if not twice a year. I think on the Osmocote labels, they say they feed for like 4 months. So switching that out and adding to it, 2 or 3 times a season is a good way to do it. And good way to keep your plants actively growing and healthy and green. So good question. And yes, you should certainly do that. While we're on fertilizer, let's go ahead and talk about choosing your soil. We highly recommend our products that we make here. Obviously, it's our EarthMix brand of products, which we carry a number of. There are 2 of them specifically that I recommend for containers. One is called our Landscape Mix. It's a very broad application product. I think I use this for my containers at my home and all my containers, really. I just really like it as a product. It starts with pine fines, which is just small little ground up bits of pine bark. And there's other good organic materials that are in with it, but it allows for good drainage. It's just a nice container mix. And it's also good to use in the ground for shrubs and trees if you wanted to plant with that. That's what we gear it towards as well. So, but there's overlap there. It can also go in containers. The other product that we sell here is it's our Proganix line, which it's called Proganix O, which the O stands for outdoor. This is a good product. It's a little bit heavier, so you don't have to water typically quite as much. It also has it's got good drainage in it too. It's a heavy, when you feel it, it's a heavy bag. The reason for that is because what we put is expanded shale in it, and this is literally just little tiny rocks, more or less. And this really opens the soil up a lot so it doesn't just compact on itself. And whenever you water, it opens up areas for it to drain as well. So those 2 products, like I said, we highly recommend out here for your containers, and I think you'll have good success. We did a trial this year on 2 massive tubs that we've got in the back. I mean, they're huge, like way big. And 2 that were exactly the same. We filled one of them up with Landscape. We filled the other one up with Proganix O. I put a ton of plants in there, vegetables, flowers, bedding plants. I mean, I filled that thing to the brim. Both of the containers pretty much performed almost identically. I didn't hardly see any differences. I wanted to see some differences, see which one may have worked better or worse or whatever. Didn't really see much of a difference. Both of them performed great. We didn't fertilize at all. We just did our product, and we got some really good results. So
I
both
also
of them are
feasted on most of the results.
What'd you say?
I also feasted on most of the results.
Yes, we all feasted on them. I ate cherry tomatoes every day for like a month.
Yep.
All the peppers got eaten.
Watermelons.
Yeah, we got watermelons spilling out of that thing.
Yep.
Basils. We put a ton of stuff in there. That was a cool little thing we did. So anyway, let's get back on topic. And so yeah, using those two soil products, if you buy them from us, I think you're gonna really, really enjoy them. Okay, so let's move on to watering. Literally the hardest topic to talk about because all plants are different. We all have different watering methods. When to water, getting on a watering schedule. It's a really hard topic for me because there is not really a schedule when it comes to plants. It really depends on weather. It depends on sun exposure. It depends on the soil you decided to use. If you didn't buy those two products from us and you got, say, a Miracle Grow potting mix from Home Depot or Lowe's or something, or you just have some left over at the house, that product, Miracle Grow specifically, does not hold hardly water at all. It really blows through the pot, and it's a very light mix, which is good for some things, but not always great for everything. So if you use that product versus something like ours that holds a little bit more water, you're going to have to water more often. Like I said, there is no set schedule for really any plant. What I recommend to you every day is to give your plants a look every single day. Just look at it. For the most part, plants will tell you when they're not happy, okay? Now, evergreens and conifers that are needle-like, like this one right here, is a little bit trickier to tell whenever they're really, really dry. They don't show signs of stress all that much like leafy plants do. Really leafy plants tend to wilt on you, and so they really show you. Like the sign of wilting is a sign of being dry. That's pretty easy. Now, these right here aren't going to do that near as much. Typically, what's going to happen to these, if they are bone dry, is you're going to see needle drop from the interior first. You can shake it a little bit. You know, you can take the pot and just hit it, bounce it around, and you'll see yellow kind of needles from the interior start to drop off early. That's a pretty clear sign of water stress on this plant. But if the plant, this is kind of across the board for me. If your plant looks good, perky, happy, green, healthy, if it looks like that, it's probably fine. It really doesn't need a ton of extra water or anything. If it looks good, let it be. That's kind of my rule all across. Like, you know, we don't want to just keep plants wet all the time. You're going to start to see like just dull yellowing on a plant like this. It's just going to be leached of nutrient. It's not going to be able to take up nutrient because it's just got soggy roots around it. We want to avoid that because a plant can live a long time when it's overwatered, actually. It just looks really bad, and we don't want that. There's no point in keeping plants in the pots that look bad.
Austin, we got another question.
Go ahead.
Does the shale in Proganix O serve the same purpose as grit in soil?
Yes, pretty much. It's exactly the same. I've got me and Tyler were just talking, or no, me and Ben were talking about this, or talking about mulch. I've got pea gravel as my mulch. Whenever I came to my home 2 years ago, the beds were mulched with pea gravel. So I've got a whole lot of pea gravel, and I had to do a whole lot of planting in my front beds, and I got all that done. And pretty much every single hole that I dug into, that I put plants into, which I put a lot of plants into, almost every single hole had a good amount of that pea gravel mixed with my soil. I kind of wanted that. I live in somewhat of a low kind of spot to where water it doesn't pool or anything, but it stays pretty moist down where I live. So I really wanted that gravel in there, with the soil, to help with some drainage and keep it to where it's not just wet all the time. Because like I said, even plants in the ground, if they're staying wet all the time, they just look bad and off color and not what you want. So yes, it's pretty much exactly like that. A lot of bonsai people that are really good at bonsai, almost every single mix that they use certainly has some sort of rock in it, whether it be real small or whether it be a little bit bigger, even like pea gravel size. So using rocks in your plantings is not a bad thing to do. So yeah, good question. That is the same. Okay, back to watering. Before I go any further, do know every one of your containers you ever plant, I don't care what plant you're planting, houseplants, tropicals, annuals, shrubs, trees, whatever you're planting, you need to have adequate drainage holes at the bottom of the pot. It is a must. You may as well just do it. If you have a pot or you bought a pot and it doesn't have a hole in it, you need to drill holes in it. I'm telling you, you may as well just get that step over with, because it's going to give you way better success than a container that just holds water and fills. You don't want that at all. A lot of people, if you do have a pot and you literally just can't get a hole in it, then you certainly need to put a nice thick, layer of, say, gravel in the bottom of that, so that water can go through and sit kind of on the rocks and not in a soil zone. So very crucial step that you need to know. And another kind of crucial step as well is right after you plant your evergreens, or any plant for that matter, and you plant them, you get them in the ground, you get them in the pot, you've packed the soil around. This is where I've done webinars on this before. I did one on mixed containers and I kind of showed you how to do this. But when you put your soil in the pot, you need to make sure that you press in the edges of the pot really well. Just kind of use your hands sideways like this and just kind of press down all the way around the pot and make sure it's nice and firm. That way, you don't want to have any space in between there, because what happens is whenever you water goes right to the edges and then right out. So we don't want that. We want to make sure we're nice and tight in there. So you planted your evergreen in your container. You've pressed your soil down really well on top of it. Make sure it's really nice and seated in the pot. It's not moving a lot after you plant it. And then right after we do that, the very first watering is by far, I've said this in probably 20 of my webinars, the very first one is the most crucial by far. So what you're going to do is bring your hose over, and you are going to, after you've planted it, you're going to fill up that container all the way to the top, and then you're going to watch it drain. So hopefully what you're going to get, if you've done your work right and you've properly pressed your soil, what you're going to get is a very slow drain. You're going to see bubbles coming up a little bit as it's slowly seeping through, and after the first time you do that, you're probably not going to see much water coming out of the drain hole yet. What I want you to do is fill that up again to the very top, let it drain. And then do that again, let it drain. This kind of depends on the size of your container. If it's a very small container, you may only have to do that 2 or 3 times. If it's an extremely large container and you've got it totally full of soil, you're going to want to probably fill that up 4 or 5 different times. And then at that point, you are going to start to see the excess water drain out the bottom, which is what you want. Whenever that soil gets to a capacity to where it can't hold any water anymore, it's going to go away. So if you have adequate drain holes, you're not going to have water sitting in that pot. They are going to go through it, and then you're going to know that the very first one is done. You've got water all around the root zone of that plant where it needs to be, pressed nice and firmly, and then you've given that a good situation for those roots to seek out its own water and expand into your pot and start growing. So that's my spiel on water. As the season goes on and we get colder and colder and whatnot, and if your plants are not getting water from rain outside, the watering is still going to be much less over the wintertime, obviously, than it would be over the summertime. Plants aren't actively growing as much, and it's not hot, so they're not evaporating and losing water quicker. So your watering schedule will probably not be all that hard on you. If you wanted to get into somewhat of a maintenance schedule, typically, depending on the plant, but typically once or twice, or once every week maybe would be fine. Maybe once every 2 weeks for some things would be fine. As long as whenever you do water, you're really watering it deeply. You're not just giving it a little spritz like every other day or something. Like that's not the way we water. We want to make sure that the plant actually needs water, and then we fill that container back up with a good hefty amount. And then simply let it be until it needs water again. So you would be amazed. I'm telling y'all, you'd be amazed how long some plants can go without water. I mean, it's truly amazing. I actually just do experiments in my house just to see. I'll buy a cheap little plant, or I'll get a cutting from somebody, let it grow for a little while, and then I'll just neglect it, and I'll just see how long can it actually go before it would die from not having enough water. And I'm telling y'all, I am amazed by it every single time on how little water plants can take before they actually kick the bucket. So err on the side of less water rather than more. Keeping a container just soaked the whole time through the wintertime is not what you want to do. So make sure you water less, but whenever you do water, make it more volume of water. Okay, so there you go. There's my watering talk. It's not an easy one. It's always hard to try to explain to people on how to do watering. So everybody's different, but that's kind of what we want to try to achieve. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of growing a plant in a container, if you ask me. I brought in a few plants today to show you, just as some really popular ones to grow in containers. So I'm just going to go around and talk about them a little bit, and then if y'all have more questions, let me know as we're getting through this. So
we just got one right now, actually. If the tag indicates the size of the plant is 4 foot to 6 feet, how does container planting reduce expectations on size, or does it?
Very good question. Very good question. It certainly changes. Growing things in containers, you're not going to get the same size that you would get out in the ground. So there's a number of plants that you can you can read a tag that says 6 to 8 foot, but then you put it in a smaller container, you're not going to see 6 to 8 foot out of that plant. And it would be years and years before you saw that. So when choosing your plants, if you're not with one of us or you just want to do it yourself, if you're looking at tags and you see that, don't let that affect you too much on what you want to choose because you think it's going to get too big. Pots restrict the size of plants, and it kind of slows them down a little bit as well. So like I said, don't worry so much about that when choosing a container, especially if it's just a one-season thing, like get it through Christmas or get it through the wintertime and then done. Don't worry so much about that. You can choose plant. If this were going in the ground in your landscape in your home, I would certainly tell you to make sure you're not using anything that's going to overcrowd your space and get too big, because it will in the ground. In pots, you don't have to worry about that so much. So choose what you like, even if the size is not what you think it should be. So good question though. All right, so where do we want to start? Let me start with this little guy. This is a nightlight Chamaecyparis. So this is a Hinoki cypress. Put that there. Nice texture on this, flowy little look. And what you notice is it's very bright yellow, which is cool. Now, the thing that you need to know about this is that for the most part, anytime you see, which golden plants are becoming much more popular because they're bright, and they're bright through the winter time, so I get it. I think they're cool too. But without enough sunlight, and I mean like 6 hours of sunlight a day, this plant will green up on you, and it will not be that golden color. So if you have a shade environment at all, like less than 4 hours of sun a day, you are not going to get the brightest color out of this plant. It's not going to stay golden for you. So just know that when choosing this one, if you do want to get this one, it prefers full on sun. So know that. All right. And behind it, right over here, one of my favorites. I'm just going to hide my face. Let me put it over. Let me switch. All right. Perfect for a round container. This is one of the easiest options for a container is boxwood. Now, you either love boxwood or you hate boxwood, it seems like. I don't know why, but that's kind of what it seems like out here. Plant people that have grown plants for a long time and done this and put a lot of plants in containers, boxwood is a go-to for a lot of them because they know it's an easy plant to use in a pot. It can handle shade. It can handle sun. It can be bone dry. I know this because I've got boxwoods in pots at my house that I've had for like 2 years now in the same pot, and I've never watered them. They're out when they get rain or whatever, which is fine, but they don't need a ton of water. It's so easy. You certainly keep these more wet, or almost everybody keeps these more wet than they should be. So like I say, love it or hate it, boxwood is an easy plant to grow in almost any scenario. There's round varieties, like this one. This is Justin Brower's boxwood, which is one of my favorites. It's a true dwarf. It is really deep green is why I like it. A very, very green color. And then it's in the spring, whenever it flushes this really chartreuse, new growth kind of color out to here with the deep green still kind of behind it. It's a beautiful, beautiful little boxwood, easy to grow in a pot. Since we're on the topic of boxwood, I'll go back to this guy. This is, let's see, this is a green mountain boxwood. So this is an upright form boxwood typically. It's obviously cut into this spiral shape. So topiaries are really fun, to people that don't know plants all that well. They're cool to look at. This almost looks fake. I mean, it's perfect. It is another boxwood. So like I said, just like the other one, it's shade tolerant, sun tolerant, and it can stay on the dry side. Do know that topiaries are expensive. So just know that whenever you look at the tag and say, oh my God, that's high. Well, it's because someone had to cut this pattern into this, someone that knew what they were doing. Because this is just an upright growing boxwood. If you never, if you didn't trim on it, it's just an upright green boxwood. It'll get about 8 feet tall, if not bigger with age. But they cut this swirl into it, made it a cool little design, and it's a very, very formal option. Good look, easy plant to grow. All right, and since we're kind of on the topic of a little bit of shade, if you do have some shade, I love this plant. This is a plum yew. So, Cephalotaxis is the genus. The genus of regular yews is Taxus. This one is Cephalotaxis, so it's kind of like a false yew, if you will. This is an excellent plant for a shade environment. Like I said, there's not a ton of needled evergreens that can handle full shade like that, but this one certainly can. It's excellent for a front porch environment. It's got a funky kind of look about it. I just brought this one in because it's small, but we do have upright growers of this plant that's very vertical. People really like them because they've got this one not so much. This one's kind of loose, but the upright form one has a somewhat modern look about it. So it's got a really clean, deep green foliage on this one as well. Looks great in a white pot, especially the upright version of this plant. Really pretty, deep green off the white. Really jumps and looks nice. But it's in a super shade-tolerant plant that can be used for containers. I sell a lot of them for containers. I think it's a cool look. All right, and then the most popular by far, I've already kind of mentioned this one a little, but for the Christmas season, especially the good old dwarf Alberta spruce. Now, this is probably the most popular one that we sell, especially for the Christmas season, but it's also probably the one people have the most trouble with. And they don't tend to have trouble with it over the wintertime. That's not the problem. The problem is if you're going to keep these in pots through the summertime. These prefer a large amount of sunlight, so similar to what I was talking about with this guy over here, but full 6 hours plus of sun a day is really recommended for dwarf Alberta spruce. And then just a tip that I can give you to kind of watch out for, this is the biggest problem with dwarf Alberta spruce is a little pest called spider mites. Spider mites don't show up until it gets nice and hot summertime, late into the spring, into the summertime. That's whenever spider mites start to come out. What you're going to see is a little brown spot kind of starting, and then it just growing and growing and growing, and then you got a big chunk of brown. And the problem with dwarf Alberta spruce is whenever you do get a chunk of brown like that, it doesn't really fill in very well. The thing about dwarf Alberta spruce is it's the slowest growing conifer I think we sell. I know it is the slowest thing. So what happens with them is it pushes all of its growth in the spring. And when I say all of its growth, I mean literally 2 inches of growth, 2 to 3 inches that come out. So it's sitting right here for now in the spring. It poofs right out to about there. That's about all you get, 2 to 3 inches of growth. And then it just sits for the rest of the season. That was its flush. That's all it does. So if you get a problem with spider mite and you start to see browning and it gets larger and larger, that typically doesn't fill in. So what you end up with is a big hole in the middle of your plant. So we want to try to avoid that. Like I said, keeping an eye on your plants, looking at them. Don't let that small problem become a big problem, because with most all insects, it is that way. You start small, and then you let a generation happen, and then you let another generation happen, and you've got a big problem really quickly. So just giving your plants a look, every day, and just seeing how they're doing, checking up on them, and you'll do better. If you do see that little brown spot happening, you need to either get some spray, like an oil, horticultural oil or soaps, to get sprayed on them, or a simple, really hard jet stream of water just to blast them out of there. Honestly, is a very productive thing to do whenever you see spider mite, because you don't want to let them get out of control. But like I said, #1 bestseller for this time of year. Excellent little Christmas tree. Hang your lights on it, hang your ornaments. It's all good. And then, last but not least, I brought in a Taylor juniper that's sitting right behind me. If you like tall and skinny, which a lot of people do nowadays, this is the plant for you. I'm just going to hold it up. So look at this. Very upright vertical grower. This plant in the ground can get upwards to 30 feet tall, but it stays pencil thin. It's like 3 foot wide. That's it. And it is a juniper. So the one thing to know about juniper is it does prefer a lot of sunlight, but it also needs to be on the dry side. Juniper does not like to have wet feet and stay wet all the time. You will see issues bad if you do that. So if you're not a very good waterer, don't feel like doing it, the hose is too far away, whatever, juniper is certainly a good option for you. And this is just one type of juniper that we sell that is a very upright in form, but we sell tons of different juniper varieties, a lot of sprawly, spready ones, some that are manicured really tight into a pyramid shape. All sorts of options for that. So like I said, if you're a horrible waterer, not very good at it, just lazy waterer, I get it. Juniper may be the plant for you. So full sun, not a lot of water, excellent upright shape right here. This is a really beautiful plant with a really nice kind of silvery cast over it. So Taylor juniper.
I love it too. We got a question. When growing perennials in pots, how do you deal with a root bound plant? Can the roots be trimmed off, or should I just keep moving the plant to a larger container?
No, you can certainly trim some roots. So I mentioned bonsai earlier. You think about that. They have to do root pruning a lot because that plant's staying in the same pot for almost the entirety of its life, and they're not moving it up every time. So yes, if your perennials are starting to get root bound in your pots, you can, a lot of times perennials you can separate too, so that'll help you out. So anytime you got a big clump of too many and you want to do some separating, start there, separate some of them out. That'll get rid of some root mass, at first, and then after that you can trim on roots, most definitely. So what I'll do, if I don't want to change out a pot or go bigger, pull the plant out of the pot, trim off, about a third of its roots, and then literally put it right back in the same pot it was just in. So, yes, good question. People are scared to death to cut roots. I don't want you to go severe on it or anything and take out 90% of its roots or anything, but you can certainly cut more on roots than you think you could, and a lot of plants do get root bound down in that pot and need to be kind of separated and worked with and opened up a little bit. And anytime you cut on top or anytime you cut down below, you're going to see a response from that. Plant's like, oh, I just lost something, I need to get more. So it will, after you top out the roots down below, you're going to see more roots grow from that, and you can do that year to year. So another good question. A lot of good questions today.
Yeah, indeed.
So anyway, like I said, those are some of the plants we use, but there's a million other options. I know we're talking about evergreens today, but there's options for deciduous things. Take red twig dogwood, for instance. That's a cool plant because it's got these blood red stems over the wintertime on bare sticks. So there's just red sticks coming out of the ground. It just looks kind of cool. You can hang lights on those or just let them be. So all sorts of plant options out here. These are just a few. One more thing I wanted to tell y'all. If this is going to be a just seasonal container for you, and you want to just get something like a dwarf Alberta spruce for the Christmas season, and then in the spring you want to change that out and get a different look of more flowering plants or what have you, whatever you want to be, what you can do is not plant the plant at all. You can literally take it in its pot and leave it in its pot that it came in, the nursery pot, sit it down in your container, put on top of it just a layer of mulch to cover up the pot, and then in the spring, you can just water the pot directly after that. You just water like it's nursery container. You don't have to water the whole thing all the way around the big pot or whatever. You just make sure you keep that container moist. And then in the springtime, whenever we start getting our annual shipments in and you want to change it out for color, just literally take the mulch back out of it, pull the pot right out of there, and you've got it still just a potted plant. You can put that in your yard somewhere. You could gift it to somebody. Whatever, but that's a way you don't have to actually plant it if you plan on redoing it anyway for the springtime. So just leave it in its container, cover it up with black, brown mulch, whatever you want, and be on your way. So, hey, Tyler.
Hey, we got another container-related pot shape. Does the pot shape dictate the type of shrub that looks better in the pot?
Yes, I think so. One thing to note on that subject is the more dense the plant you have up top, the more leafy it is, means the more wind it can catch. So that's a big problem that all nurserymen have. We have the same problem out here, is keeping our plants upright on windy days. So using containers that have like a vase shape that go down to like a smaller bottom rather than the top, for me, I'm going to avoid a really leafy, dense plant. I don't want that to catch a lot of wind when it doesn't have a big base at the bottom, because they can blow over and crack. Now, ceramic pots are expensive. We don't want that happening, so we need to make sure they stay upright. And another really good practice to use with containers, so they don't blow over, is to, like I said earlier, add a layer of gravel down at the bottom. Just some cheap 3/4 inch gravel, put in the bottom of the pot. That's going to help with the weight, overall weight of the pot, and that's going to help them from blowing around and moving around for you. So, but yes, I do think that pot shape dictates what kind of plant I'm going to put in it for sure. So if you want to, you can bring your containers out here with you if they're small enough. I don't want you to have to lug these big, huge things around. But if you have small enough containers that you want to put something in, bring them with you. We can even pot them up for you if you want us to. I love potting stuff up for people. If you're a little nervous or you've never done it before, I can give you a crash course. I can teach you how to do it right here on site the first time, and that way you'll remember how to do it forever. So if that's something that's that you want to do, certainly bring out your pots and let us help you with that. So, anything else? We got any other questions out there?
Brenda, we are broadcasting right now from Nashville, Tennessee. Our zone technically is Zone 7 or Zone 7A, if you want to get really specific.
Yeah.
So that is where we are at and where we're talking about these evergreens here. And maybe Austin can inform a little bit more about how the zone range influences that for your container evergreens.
Yeah, for the most part, anything we sell that's out on the lot out here generally is going to live through the winter time here, especially conifers. Now, there are a couple of evergreens that I would avoid when shopping out here. That's why whenever you come out, find one of us, because we can let you know if something's a little less hardy. Tyler just earlier mentioned gardenia, and that being one of them. Everybody loves gardenia, and it's a leafy, shiny evergreen plant. I would never plant gardenia in a container over the winter here. You're going to see burn. You're going to see not a great looking plant. So that's why you chat with one of us, and we can recommend, to not use something like that if it's going to be, a problem through the wintertime. And then on the reverse end, there's some things we don't sell because they can't take our summers here. Everybody loves Colorado blue spruce, and I love it too. I wish it, performed a little better. And sometimes blue spruce does fine around here, but a lot of times as the summertime goes on, it stresses. So that would be one that I would avoid for a container. But like I said, talk to one of us and we'll help you out with that. But for the most part, all of the plants we sell out on the lot are going to make it through the winter without too much burn or issues. All right, y'all, we really appreciate you watching these and tuning in and shopping with us here at Bates and just hanging out and wanting to learn about plants. We love it. I love it. I learn about plants every single day, even still. So we do appreciate you tuning in, and we'll keep putting them out there. So keep watching. Thank you.